What does it take to survive in the ruthless underworld of 1960s London? For Frankie Fraser, it was violence, loyalty, and a reputation for madness. Known as Mad Frankie, Fraser's criminal career spanned decades, from smashing ration laws in wartime to enforcing brutal gang rules for the Richardson brothers. Frankie Fraser, a key figure in the infamous Richardson gang of South London, was notorious for his violent tendencies and erratic behavior. The Richardson gang, rivals of the East End's equally notorious Kray twins, relied on Fraser as an enforcer who carried out brutal acts to protect their interests and maintain control over their criminal empire. Fraser's reputation as a ruthless enforcer earned him the nickname Mad Frankie, and he became one of the most feared figures in the London underworld. His career of violence and crime led to his eventual arrest and trial for the murder of an associate of the Kray twins, as well as his role in the Richardson gang's horrific torture sessions against those they suspected of betrayal. His actions resulted in a staggering 42 years of imprisonment, cementing his legacy as one of Britain's most infamous gangsters. Francis Davidson Fraser was born on December 12, 1923, as the youngest of 5 children in a family of modest means. His father, a sailor of partly American Indian ancestry, and his mother, who had Irish and Norwegian roots, raised their children in a Roman Catholic household in the Waterloo area of London. The family's financial struggles were a constant reality, but they initially refrained from engaging in criminal activities. At the age of 5, young Frankie moved with his family to a flat on Walworth Road in Elephant and Castle, a move that would mark the beginning of his exposure to the tougher side of London life. By the age of 10, he had already turned to petty crime, often teaming up with his sister Eva, with whom he shared a close bond. The outbreak of the Second World War in 1939 provided an unusual backdrop for Frankie's burgeoning criminal activities. Although he initially enlisted in the army, his rebellious nature saw him deserting multiple times, preferring the allure of illegal ventures to the regimented life of a soldier. The wartime environment, with its frequent blackouts and scarcity of goods due to rationing, created ample opportunities for criminals like Fraser to profit from the black market. With many police officers conscripted into the armed forces, Fraser found it relatively easy to break into homes during air raid blackouts, stealing valuables from occupants who were sheltering from bombings. In 1941, his criminal activities escalated when he was caught breaking into a hosiery store in Waterloo. This marked the beginning of his encounters with the penal system, as he was sent to Borstal and later sentenced to 15 months in HM Prison Wandsworth for shopbreaking. Rather than deter him, his time in prison only seemed to fuel his appetite for criminal exploits. Fraser later joked in a television interview that the war had been a lucrative period for him and that he had never forgiven the Germans for surrendering, a remark that highlighted his dark humor and lack of remorse. By 1942, while serving another sentence at HM Prison Chelmsford, Fraser was conscripted into the British Army. However, his disdain for authority remained steadfast. He never wore the uniform, ignored call-up papers, and repeatedly deserted whenever apprehended, choosing instead to continue his life of crime. This pattern of defiance and lawbreaking would define his early years and set the stage for his later rise as a key player in one of London's most feared criminal gangs. By the conclusion of World War II in 1945, Frankie Fraser had fully immersed himself in a world of serious and organized crime. His post-war activities marked the escalation of his criminal career, beginning with a daring smash-and-grab raid on a jeweler's shop. This brazen act, however, did not go unpunished, as Fraser was apprehended and sentenced to a 2-year term in HM Prison Pentonville. It was during this incarceration that prison doctors first labeled him as legally insane, a designation that would follow him throughout his life. Following this diagnosis, Fraser was transferred to Cane Hill Hospital, a psychiatric institution, where he remained until his release in 1949. Far from turning over a new leaf, Fraser immediately resumed his life of crime, this time under the wing of the notorious West End gangster Billy Hill. Hill, a prominent figure in London's criminal scene during the 1950s, was heavily involved in protection rackets alongside another infamous gangster, Jack Spot. Fraser became one of Hill's trusted enforcers, serving as a bodyguard and participating in various criminal endeavors, including bank robberies orchestrated by Hill's crew. These activities eventually led to Fraser's arrest and incarceration at HM Prison Durham. While serving his sentence at Durham, Fraser was again declared insane by prison authorities. This time, he was sent to the high-security Broadmoor Hospital, a facility for the criminally insane. Fearing the potential consequences of being heavily medicated and subdued, Fraser adopted a strategy of compliance, maintaining a low profile during his stay. This approach proved effective, and he was released in 1955. Without hesitation, Fraser returned to Hill's organization, resuming his role as an enforcer and becoming deeply involved in the violent gang war that erupted between Hill and his former ally, Jack Spot. In 1956, Fraser played a pivotal role in a brutal assault on Jack Spot and his wife, Rita. The attack took place just a short distance from the couple's Paddington home, where they were ambushed by a group of up to 8 men. Armed with clubs and knives, Fraser and Bobby Warren led the charge in the violent assault that left Spot and his wife severely injured. This attack ultimately forced Spot into an early retirement from the criminal world, clearing the way for Billy Hill to solidify his control over the lucrative West End territories. However, Fraser's involvement in the attack did not go unnoticed by law enforcement. Both he and Bobby Warren were arrested and subsequently sentenced to 7 years in prison for their roles in the crime. When Fraser was finally released, he found a London underworld that had undergone significant transformation during his time behind bars. The once dominant factions of the West End had given way to new power structures. In the East End, the infamous Cray twins had risen to prominence, establishing their reign over the area through their gang, known as the Firm. Meanwhile, in the South, the Richardson gang had emerged as the dominant force, claiming control over the territories Fraser had once operated in. Frankie Fraser's connection to the infamous Richardson gang began in the early 1960s when he first crossed paths with Charlie and Eddie Richardson. These two brothers, ostensibly scrap metal dealers operating out of Camberwell in South London, controlled their territory with an iron grip. Beneath their legitimate business facade lay a sprawling web of criminal enterprises, encompassing activities such as drug trafficking, prostitution, and the production and distribution of pornography. Their ruthlessness and ambition earned them a notorious reputation in London's underworld. In the summer of 1963, London witnessed the audacious Great Train Robbery, during which £2.61 million was stolen in one of the most infamous heists in British history. The robbery was masterminded by Bruce Reynolds and carried out by members of the South West Gang, a group with strong ties to the Richardson brothers. Fraser was approached to take part in the elaborate operation but ultimately declined. At the time, he was a fugitive, evading police capture, and participation in such a high-profile crime would have only heightened the risks he faced. Despite his absence from the heist, Fraser narrowly avoided being implicated in the robbery. Authorities initially suspected him of involvement, but the Richardson brothers stepped in to protect him. They bribed a police officer to deflect suspicion, an act that solidified the bond between Fraser and the Richardson family. This gesture of loyalty marked the beginning of Fraser's close association with the gang. He quickly became one of their most trusted and fearsome enforcers, infamous for his brutal methods of dealing with disloyalty. Among his notorious techniques was the gruesome act of extracting the teeth of traitors using pliers, a chilling demonstration of the gang's penchant for sadistic punishments. Under Fraser's influence, the Richardson gang expanded its criminal operations, using a fruit machine business, Atlantic Machines, as a front for their illicit dealings. The gang's roster included other infamous figures such as George Cornell, Jimmy Moody, and Albert Longman. Cornell, like Fraser, had a reputation for being volatile and unpredictable, qualities that would later lead to serious conflicts with rival gangs, particularly the East End's Cray twins. The Richardson gang's interactions with the Crays initially stemmed from a shared history between Charlie Richardson and George Cornell, who had both served time at Shepton Mallet Prison. While there was a certain degree of mutual respect between the two groups, tensions grew as the mid-1960s approached, leading to a series of escalating feuds. These disputes frequently culminated in violent confrontations, and attempts to resolve their differences were often held in London pubs such as the Grave Maurice. However, these sit-downs rarely achieved lasting peace. The animosity between the two gangs was further fueled by George Cornell's personal history with the Kray twins. Once a member of their crew, Cornell defected in 1964 to work for the Richardson brothers. This betrayal ignited a deep-seated hatred between him and Ronnie Kray, who was known for his unpredictable and violent nature. Their rivalry led to several altercations, including one infamous incident at the Brown Bear pub. According to accounts from jewel thief and safecracker Lenny Hamilton, Cornell managed to knock Ronnie Kray unconscious during a heated confrontation, further stoking the flames of their feud. One of the most infamous episodes in their rivalry centers around a supposed insult Cornell directed at Ronnie. The story goes that Cornell called him a fat poof, a slur referencing Ronnie's homosexuality. However, Ronnie later disputed this claim, stating in a 1989 interview from Broadmoor Hospital that the real source of tension was Cornell's threat to kill him. Regardless of the exact cause, the animosity between the two men would culminate in a violent and tragic resolution, forever marking the history of London's criminal underworld. On the night of March 7, 1966, Mr. Smith's nightclub in Rushy Green, Catford, became the stage for one of the most infamous shootouts in London's gangland history. Members of the Richardson gang, including Frankie Fraser, Eddie Richardson, and Jimmy Moody, gathered at the club for an evening of drinking. Sharing the venue were Billy Hayward, leader of a rival South London gang, along with his associates Henry Botten and Peter Hennessy. Adding to the tension was the presence of Richard "Dickie" Hart, an associate of the Kray twins. Although Hart wasn't officially part of the Kray firm, his close friendship with the notorious siblings gave him significant weight in the underworld. Initially, the atmosphere at Mr. Smith's was calm, with the rival gangs seated at separate tables. However, as more Richardson gang members arrived, the situation grew tense. Billy Hayward began to suspect trouble, particularly because he had been involved in an affair with the wife of Roy Porritt, a mechanic for Frank and Eddie Richardson. This personal feud made him a likely target for retribution. Sensing potential danger, Hayward sent one of his men to retrieve weapons, preparing for what seemed an inevitable clash. As the night stretched into the early hours, Eddie Richardson approached Hayward's table around 3:30 a.m., reminding him that the club's license only extended until 3 a.m. He politely suggested that Hayward and his gang finish their drinks and leave. Instead of complying, Peter Hennessy, one of Hayward's men, took offense and hurled insults at Eddie, calling him a half-baked fucking ponce and boldly declaring he could take you any fucking time you like. What began as a verbal altercation quickly escalated into a physical fight, with Eddie Richardson and Hennessy trading punches. The brawl spread across the club as fists flew, and chaos erupted. Amid the mayhem, Dickie Hart shocked everyone by pulling out a firearm. Brandishing the weapon, he shouted, "Somebody's going to die," and fired indiscriminately. His shot struck Harry Rawlings, a member of the Richardson gang, inflicting a serious shoulder wound. As panic swept through the nightclub, Jimmy Moody and Ronnie Jeffries rushed to carry the bleeding Rawlings to safety, while Frankie Fraser attempted to de-escalate the situation and disarm Hart. In the midst of this chaos, Billy Gardner, one of Hayward's men, approached Fraser and asked, "You tooled up, Frank?" Without waiting for an answer, Gardner shot Fraser in the thigh with a .38 pistol. Despite his injury, Fraser retaliated with remarkable ferocity. He knocked the gun from Hart's hand and proceeded to beat him savagely. The scene became even more brutal as Fraser repeatedly kicked Hart, reportedly so viciously that Henry Botten, another Hayward associate, exclaimed, "You're fucking mad, Frank. You're fucking bonkers." This incident is widely believed to be the origin of Fraser's infamous nickname, Mad Frankie. As the violence continued, Hart attempted to escape, heading toward the stairs. However, someone in the chaos, though their identity remains unclear, shot him dead before he could make his getaway. His lifeless body was found near the bottom of the stairs, marking the tragic culmination of the night's events. The aftermath of the shootout left Mr. Smith's nightclub looking like a scene from a Wild West movie, with one unnamed gangster later comparing it to Dodge City. The violence didn't end at the club. Both Eddie Richardson and Frankie Fraser, wounded in the fray, were taken to Lewisham Hospital for treatment. When questioned by police, the two gangsters feigned ignorance, responding dismissively with, "Shooting? What shooting?" Meanwhile, members of the Hayward gang sought refuge and assistance from another notorious figure, Freddie Foreman, as the fallout from the night began to unfold. The repercussions of the incident were swift and brutal. 2 days after Dickie Hart's death, the ongoing tensions between the Richardson gang and the Krays boiled over. George Cornell, a former Kray associate who had defected to the Richardson side, was sitting in the Blind Beggar pub enjoying a drink with friends. When Ronnie Kray entered the pub with two companions, Cornell, apparently unfazed, reportedly sneered, "Well, look what the dogs brought in." Ronnie Kray, already simmering with rage from past altercations with Cornell, drew a gun and shot him in the head, killing him instantly. This act marked Ronnie's first murder and signaled a dramatic escalation in the bloody rivalry between the two most notorious gangs of the era. With George Cornell dead and the Richardson gang's leadership either incapacitated or behind bars, the organization faced an unprecedented wave of scrutiny. Associates who had suffered under the gang's brutal methods of enforcement began stepping forward to expose the horrific extent of their crimes. Among these witnesses was a man who had endured a vicious beating in July 1965 after being deemed guilty of disloyalty to the gang. His punishment had been particularly humiliating. He was forced to mop up his own blood using nothing but his underpants. The turning point in the gang's downfall came when Johnny Bradbury, a trusted member of the Richardson crew, decided to betray them by turning Queen's evidence. In exchange for immunity from prosecution, Bradbury detailed the gang's horrific torture tactics. His testimony painted a vivid and chilling picture of the lengths to which the Richardsons would go to maintain control and punish perceived traitors. Among the brutal methods he described were the extraction of teeth with pliers, the amputation of toes with bolt cutters, and the barbaric practice of nailing victims to the floor with 6-inch nails. The revelations culminated in what became known as the infamous torture trial, which began in April 1967 at the Old Bailey. The court was presented with harrowing accounts of the gang's sadistic punishments, including their use of a hand-cranked electric generator to inflict pain on their victims. This generator, originally designed to send SOS signals from aircraft during World War II, had been salvaged by Charlie Richardson from a scrap bomber dismantled at his Camberwell scrapyard on New Church Road. Its operation involved generating electric shocks so excruciating that even the most hardened individuals could not withstand the pain. Roy Hall, a Richardson associate tasked with operating the generator, later recounted the psychological and physical toll it inflicted on victims. According to Hall, the sheer agony of the electric shocks would break even the toughest men, reducing them to a state of childlike desperation. "They can't take it anymore," he explained. "No one can. They start begging for their mummy. It's something you can't fully understand unless you see it. Even months later, if you meet them in a pub, they're still haunted. They're broken for good, and it never heals." The trial exposed not only the Richardson gang's appalling acts of violence, but also their systematic use of fear and psychological control to dominate South London's criminal underworld. The jury found the gang members guilty of a range of charges, and the sentences handed down were severe. Eddie Richardson, who was already serving time for a fray, had an additional 15 years added to his sentence. His brother Charlie, the gang's mastermind, received a staggering 25-year prison term. Frankie Fraser, whose involvement in the gang's torture sessions was well documented, was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Roy Hall, the generator operator, received the same sentence. Frankie Fraser's later years were as tumultuous as the rest of his life, particularly during his long stretches in prison, where he earned a reputation for being a persistent troublemaker. His years behind bars were marked by countless acts of violence and defiance against both prison staff and fellow inmates. He frequently participated in riots and was unafraid to challenge authority, often resorting to physical confrontations with guards and governors over what he perceived as injustices. One of the most infamous incidents occurred during the 1969 Parkhurst prison riot, where Fraser played a leading role. His defiance came at a price. He was so badly injured in the ensuing chaos that he spent 6 weeks recovering in the prison hospital. Fraser's rebellious nature made him a constant thorn in the side of prison officials. His sentences were repeatedly extended due to his violent behavior, often targeting warders and governors. Punishments for his disobedience included floggings, bread and water diets, and the loss of remission time. While serving time at Strangeways Prison in Manchester in 1980, he was granted permission to wear slippers instead of standard prison boots. This unusual allowance came after another inmate scalded Fraser's feet by pouring boiling water on them, an act of retaliation following a violent altercation in which Fraser had attacked the man. After spending decades behind bars, Fraser was finally released in 1985. His release marked a shift in his public persona. He transitioned from a feared gangster to something of a celebrity figure. He became a familiar face on television, giving interviews about his years with the Richardson gang and his extensive criminal history. He also capitalized on his notoriety by offering Gangland tours of London. These tours took participants to infamous crime scenes, such as the Blind Beggar pub, where Ronnie Cray had shot George Cornell. Fraser's storytelling and first-hand accounts of gangland violence turned him into a macabre icon of Britain's underworld. However, Fraser's life outside prison wasn't free from danger. In July 1991, at the age of 68, he was the target of an attempted murder. He was shot in the head at close range outside the 10 Mills Club in Clerkenwell, London. Initially, rumors swirled that the hit had been ordered by the Addams family, a powerful crime syndicate in Clerkenwell. Fraser, however, dismissed this claim, insisting that the attack was carried out by rogue police officers. The shooting left him with permanent injuries. Part of his mouth was destroyed in the incident, affecting his ability to speak clearly. True to his character, Fraser refused to cooperate with police, stating, "If you play by the sword, you've got to expect the sword as well." Despite his injuries, Fraser remained active in the public eye. In 1994, he published his memoir, Mad Frank, which provided a candid account of his life of crime. Tragedy struck his personal life in 1999 when his wife, with whom he had 4 sons, passed away. Of his children, 3 followed in their father's footsteps, engaging in criminal activities, while the 4th chose a lawful path. Fraser, ever the humorist, often joked that his law-abiding son had let me down. In his later years, Fraser lived in a sheltered accommodation home in Peckham, but even in his twilight years, controversy seemed to follow him. According to Eddie Richardson, Fraser developed Alzheimer's disease, which affected the last 3 years of his life. In June 2013, at the age of 89, he made headlines once more when police served him with an antisocial behavior order after he became embroiled in a heated argument with another resident. Despite spending an estimated 40 to 42 years behind bars throughout his lifetime, Fraser's defiant spirit never seemed to fade. On November 21, 2014, Fraser underwent leg surgery at King's College Hospital in Denmark Hill but fell critically ill during the procedure. He was placed into an induced coma, and on November 26, after his family made the difficult decision to withdraw life support, he passed away at the age of 90. His ashes were later scattered near the grave of his former ally, Charlie Richardson, in Camberwell New Cemetery, a fitting resting place for one of London's most infamous and enduring figures of the criminal underworld.